So we're running a few minutes behind, but this is famous unsolved codes that we all know Elonka. So,
Hi, welcome. Happy Halloween, everybody. This is pretty awesome. The last time I gave this talk was at DragonCon, and I tweeted about it. One of the attendees at the talk was the flying spaghetti monster. So at this talk here, I'm at PhreakNIC and I have Jesus. So it's like my talk just appeals to everyone. I think this is awesome. What do you think? So, okay, so let's see. How many people here have come to one of my talks before? Okay, so there's a few. So I'll speak introductory briefly. Hi, my name's Elonka. I have many hobbies. One of them is codes, also games and Wikipedia and geocaching and lots of other stuff. And I had a long story that I'm not going to tell because I don't have a lot of time here, but I got really interested in this sculpture called Kryptos, which is at the CIA headquarters. It's the one on the left. By the way, if you're sitting in the back, you might want to move up because it's a small screen and there's going to be a lot of interesting text here, but up to you guys. So as I was researching Kryptos, and I'll be talking much more about Kryptos later on in this talk, I was also interested in other famous unsolved codes, and lots of people were asking me. So I decided to put together this talk to kind of just give a really quick overview of some of the world's most famous unsolved codes. So on this slide we have Kryptos on the left, and on the right we have another one which is called the Voynich Manuscript, which I have a sample of, which my assistant Kaylin here is taking a look at. And it's a manuscript that's hundreds of years old and has hundreds of pages with many interesting drawings of plants that we cannot identify, and many pages of text that we cannot read in an alphabet that we've never seen before. So let's see. So these are some of the other famous unsolved codes that I have on my webpage. I won't be going over all of these in detail. I'll kind of be hitting a few in the top 10. It's difficult to say what is the most famous unsolved code. I generally list the Beale ciphers at the top, and I'll be going into those. It's a pamphlet that was published in Virginia in the late 1800s. The Voynich Manuscript, which I mentioned, the Dora Bella cipher, which was written by the composer Edward Elgar, the guy who wrote Pomp and Circumstance. And then, of course, the Zodiac Killer ciphers, the serial murder in California, and Kryptos. So going over the Voynich Manuscript first, these are some images of a few of the pages and kind of the text. It's very elaborate. Someone spent a lot of time creating it. Hundreds of years old. There's only one copy in existence, which is at the Voynich Rare Book Library at Yale University. It has been radiocarbon dated. Each page is a piece of parchment that came from a sheepskin. So we know that the sheep from whom the parchment was made lived between about 1408 to 1438, which may or may not have been the time that the Voynich Manuscript was created. It's possible that it was a copy of something much older, or it's possible that somebody got a hold of the parchment from the 1400s and then wrote something on it much later. But in general, we assume it was probably made around 1400s or 1500s. Many pictures of plants that we cannot identify. Sometimes we'll see something and we'll see, okay, well, we sort of know what those leaves look like. We sort of know what that flower looks like. But then a botanist will look at it and go, well, yeah, but you never see roots like that on that type of a plant. Or you never see leaves that go along with that type of flower. So it's sort of like the plants have all been scrambled. And then along with the plants, there's another section where you get these tiny little women that are dancing in these green pools. And there's always a flow into the pools coming in, and there's always a flow out of the pools. Again, we don't really know what it means. It's definitely not like other things that were drawn in the 1400s or the 1500s, but it has an odd consistency throughout the manuscript. This flower, some might look at it and say it looks like a passion flower. So if you're really familiar with passion flowers always have like 10 petals. So why would this one be drawn with only 5? Another one of the mysteries. If we were going to transcribe it, it would have a rhythm to it. It would have a pattern. You know, but again, we can't read it. We don't know what it says. It feels like a Western language like English or French or Latin. It breaks apart into words. There are letters that are repeated. It was written by someone who was writing with a quill pen, writing left to right. Maybe one creator, maybe two or three. There's some debate on that. But again, we have no idea. No idea what it is. It came to public attention in 1912 when a Polish book dealer named Voynich purchased it from a monastery in Italy. There are some things that it resembles. It resembles some things that are called herbal manuscripts. And we have, this is an example of an actual herbal manuscript written in, I don't remember if this is in Latin or in Greek, but plants we can identify. This is another one, really nice one. This came from the 6th century. And you can see that a lot of energy was put into drawing these herbs and then describing what the herbs could be used for. This is another example of that passion flower. So you can see real flowers on the left, 10 petals, and then the one in the Voynich Manuscript, 5. Why? There's also these odd cylindrical things, which we don't know what they are. Were they lenses? Were they early microscopes? Were they jars of some sort to hold herbal ointments? Don't know, but somebody put a lot of energy into drawing them. And what looks sort of like a recipe. Put 5 of these in here and mix. And then there are these pages that fold out. This is the most famous of the pages. It's called the Rosette's page. And is it a map? Is it just the drawing of someone who's schizophrenic and was drawing something that was pleasing to them? Was somebody trying to draw something that they'd seen elsewhere and didn't remember exactly? I wish I could tell you. I don't know. We do know that on this Rosette's page, very, very small, there's a tiny picture of a castle in a circle. You can see it sort of on the side there. If you turn it over, you can see, and it's got this interesting architectural element where the battlements are with that kind of dip in the battlements. In architectural terms, it's called a swallowtail merlon. And today you can find castles kind of all around Europe that have that element, but around the 1400s and 1500s, there was only really one area that you find, and that was in northern Italy. So it's possible that that's a clue as to where the manuscript was created. Maybe, don't know. Maybe it was a deliberate hoax. There was a very wealthy nobleman, the Emperor Rudolph at the time, who was known for purchasing curiosities and spending large amounts of gold ducats for curiosities. So it's possible that somebody created the Voynich manuscript as a way of extracting gold ducats from the Emperor Rudolph. We have some documentation that it was purchased for 600 gold ducats, which would be about $80,000 today. So that would be incentive to make an elaborate hoax. It came to modern attention, as I said, in 1912. Polish-American book dealer Wilfred Voynich. He had been purchasing manuscripts at the Villa Mondragone near Rome. It was a monastery that was running short on funds, and so they were very discreetly selling some of their holdings. And he went in and purchased several, and he called the Voynich manuscript the ugly duckling of the batch, because all the others were like illuminated manuscripts of gold, and you'd have religious symbols, and then there was this, with no religious iconography there, no crosses, no saints, no halos, but small women swimming in green pools and plants that could not be identified. So he spent a lot of time trying to decrypt it, had no luck with it, but the manuscript took his name in 1912, so that's why it's called the Voynich Manuscript. So main theories on it, could be a hoax. If it's a hoax, it's a pretty elaborate hoax. Maybe it's an artificial language. Some of the code breakers in World War II, Friedman's group, and they could crack like Japanese ciphers, and for fun they'd go and crack other codes, but they couldn't make any headway on Voynich. Could be an artificial language, but the patterns aren't quite right. Maybe it was just someone who was mentally ill, say the child of a wealthy family who had access to the resources. Whoever created the Voynich manuscript it would have taken some money to do it. Hundreds of pages of parchment, not cheap, a lot of ink, the quills and everything to create these. So, yeah, this is something. Maybe it's a code. Why would it be encrypted at the time? Well, this was also around the time of the search for the Philosopher's Stone. Alchemy, so maybe that's why the plants are mixed up. Like somebody was trying to find a way to make gold out of lead, and they were trying to find a way to come up with some ointment for immortality by mixing different plants together. Possible. Possible that it was an actual language. And we've just lost all other examples of that language. We've never found anything else that uses those words, never found anything else that uses that alphabet. But maybe it was, a little micronation somewhere in Europe, and just all the other documents were lost because they were dull, and Voynich Manuscript survived because it was pretty. Question?
You mentioned alphabet. What do you know any specifics on what it is?
The alphabet, there's been a lot of statistical analysis of what we call it Voynichese, kind of putting together. It has about, depending on how you want to count it, around 28 characters or so. It's difficult because if you were, say, a space alien and coming down and looking at someone who was writing a letter, and you saw the letter M, right? You wouldn't know that it was one letter. Maybe each loop was a different letter. Yeah. Maybe the curlicue at the top was another letter. So we made some guesses that we think it's about 28 characters, but maybe some are lowercase and some are uppercase, and we just don't know. But you can go online. Friedman's group digitized the whole thing and put it on key punch cards back in around World War II. And now you can just go online, you can download the whole thing if you want to go play with it. But again, there's some guesses that were made, so just because it's been put online doesn't mean that they made the right assumptions about what's a letter and what isn't a letter. It's also possible that maybe somebody was selling herbal remedies. And so I think 1400s, it's about 100 years or so after the Black Plague. People are a little more concerned about health, buying things to be healthy. And the cost of an ointment would be directly proportional to the rarity of the herbs that would be in that ointment. So if somebody who was unscrupulous wanted to sell something that was really expensive, they could say, look at all the plants that were used for this. You've never seen plants like this before. Very rare, very difficult to get. Therefore, I'm going to charge you a lot of money for this ointment. But again, just all speculation at this point. So, quick summary on the Voynich Manuscript. We believe it was probably created in the early 1400s, maybe northern Italy, but no language or alphabet. We can't identify the plants, and it is known as the world's most mysterious manuscript. Anybody who wants to see some of the pages more closely, I do have a sample up here. Dora Bella cipher. Edward Elgar. He wrote this in 1897. It was written for a young woman, a 22-year-old friend, Miss Dora Penny. He'd sent a letter to someone else, I believe her aunt, and then there was this message to Dora, and she was never able to decipher it. Later on in her memoirs, she wrote saying, well, here's this message. I would appreciate if anyone could tell me what it says. They had talked about codes at the time, but she was not a cryptographer. She was not into puzzles. So it's unlikely that he made it something particularly difficult. He has also written other things in this style. So there are notes of this in museums that keep information about Edward Elgar. Someday I may spend more time looking at this. There's been a lot of theories. A lot of people come from, oh, I solved it, and it has to do with music, or it must mean this or it must mean that. But no solution has ever been absolutely verified. It's very common for people to come forward and say they've solved one of the world's most famous unsolved codes. Especially the media loves picking up on it. Like a professor at a university will say, I've solved the Voynich Manuscript, and all of a sudden it goes international news. And those of us that actually study these codes will go, oh, okay, that's false solution 2014-3. And we just kind of make a list of them. You can go online. Because it's not just enough to say, oh, I've solved it. You have to provide enough of your solution technique so that someone else could replicate what you did. It's basic scientific method. Can an independent party duplicate what you did and say, yes, I can get plain text out of this as well, and my plain text says the same thing that your plain text does. And there's the Beale ciphers. This is a big piece of Americana, because in Virginia in the late 1800s, a pamphlet was published that had 3 encrypted messages. One of them was decrypted with the Declaration of Independence, so it's sort of a kind of a loose inspiration for the movie National Treasure. And the one that was, and the other 2 messages have not been decrypted. And the one that was decrypted talks about a fabulous treasure that was buried somewhere near Bedford, Virginia. Hundreds, thousands of dollars of gold and precious jewels that have been buried. So many people have gone to Bedford, Virginia with shovels, and there have been many holes dug all around the landscape, and sometimes people have even bulldozed entire hills away, but no treasure has been found. So everything that's known about it comes from this one single pamphlet about a man named Thomas Beale, Thomas J. Beale, who arrived in Bedford County, and he had a story about how he was a Virginia gentleman. And in the early 1800s, he and 30 other Virginia gentlemen of the area had gone adventuring to the west to go hunt buffalo and whatnot. And while they were chasing buffalo north of Santa Fe, so probably around southwestern Colorado, they stumbled, like literally, like there on the surface of the ground, they found gold. And they spent the next, I think, 18 months mining this gold with nobody finding out. And then they charged Beale with transporting all of this gold back to Virginia. And he traded some of the gold for gems in St. Louis, according to the story, and then concealed the treasure and gave all the papers in a locked box to a trustworthy innkeeper, Robert Morris. Robert Morris was he was real, we verified he was there. And then, according to the story, a few months later, Beale sent a letter to Morris, and then nothing's heard from him after that. So as the story goes, 22 years later, in 1845, Morris opens the box, he finds these encrypted letters, and then he can't really do anything with them, and then decades later, when he's an old man, he gives the box to an unnamed friend. This unnamed friend figures out that paper number 2 can be decrypted with the Declaration of Independence, and then this unnamed friend writes a pamphlet, which they then have published by another friend, James B. Ward, again, an actual real person who's there. And this pamphlet sells quite briskly in 1885, and many people got very interested in it. So this is what paper number 2 looked like, a series of numbers. And the way it was decrypted is you would take the Declaration of Independence. So the numbers are like 115, 73, 24, 807. So 115. So you go to the 115th word of the Declaration of Independence, which starts with the word I. Right? The word is instituted here, and you take the first letter, which is I. Then you take the second word, or the second number, which is 73, which is the word hold. You take the first letter of that one, which is H, and go forward like this. And so I-H-A-V-E, I have deposited. So paper number 2, I have deposited in the county of Bedford, about 4 miles from Beaufort's, in an excavation or vault 6 feet below the surface of the ground, the following articles belonging jointly to the parties whose names are given in number 3 herewith. The first deposit consisted of 1,014 pounds of gold and 3,812 pounds of silver, deposited November 1819. The second was made December 1821 and consisted of 1,907 pounds of gold and 1,288 pounds of silver, also jewels obtained in St. Louis in exchange for silver to save transportation and valued at $13,000. The above is securely packed in iron pots with iron covers. The vault is roughly lined with stone, and the vessels rest on solid stone and are covered with others. Paper number 1 describes the exact locality of the vault so that no difficulty will be had in finding it. So you can definitely, it piques the curiosity. Paper number 1, again, bunch of numbers, supposedly describes the locality of the vault. Paper number 3, the names and residences of the people to whom the treasure supposedly belongs. So, was it a real treasure, or is this a hoax? There are inconsistencies in the language, like they talked about, we were chased in this area because the buffalo there was a stampede. But the word stampede, those who study language say that word really didn't come into usage until the late 1800s. So if someone wrote a pamphlet saying, you know, here's a letter that was reproduced in 1820s, it kind of casting doubt on it. It's also just the whole story doesn't really pass the sniff test. 3 wagons full of gold being transported all the way from the west to be buried in Virginia. Why in Virginia? Why weren't they buried somewhere out west? Also, 30 guys mining gold for 18 months and no one heard about it? You got to think of like the 49ers. When the story of gold got out, it spread like wildfire. The idea that something could be kept that much of a secret for 18 months, very, very unlikely. So, and paper number 3, so this was another letter by Beale that was reproduced in this pamphlet. Where he said, you will find in one of the papers, written in cipher, the names of all my associates, who are each entitled to an equal part of our treasure. And opposite to the names of each one will be found the names and residences of the relatives and others to whom they devise their respective portions. From this you will be enabled to carry out the wishes of all by distributing the portion of each to the parties designated. This will not be difficult as their residences are given and they can easily be found. So Beale had 30 associates. The paper number 3 only has 618 characters, 618 numbers. So to have that much information in a message with only 600 characters is unlikely. Now, it's possible that the cipher, it's a different kind of cipher, so instead of each number representing a letter, maybe each number represents a word or represents a phrase. There could be some sort of compression algorithm going on to put that much information into a message of 618 numbers. But again, it just doesn't feel right. Again, this is paper number 3. Names and residences. So, but a lot of people, they still show up with shovels and dynamite and digging holes around the Virginia countryside. Question, when back?
So we don't know what's in paper number 1 and 3, is that correct?
Correct. Paper number 1 and 3 have not been cracked.
So I'm wondering if paper number 1 says ignore everything in paper number 2. And so 2 is just a honeypot just to mess with everyone.
It's possible. Jim Golodley, who was at one point was the head of the American Cryptogram Association, did some interesting statistical analysis of both papers 1 and 3. And he found that if you use the Declaration of Independence on paper number 1, you get just garbage for many, many characters, and then you get the alphabet suddenly shows up, like A, B, C, 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 D, D, E, F, F, which is an interesting anomaly. Some people would say, aha, it proves that there's multiple layers. Other people say, no, it shows that somebody was perpetrating a hoax and they just got bored and started just, coming up with the alphabet as a way of creating the numbers that were in this document.
Have they tried running the Declaration of Independence backwards?
I can't say for sure every method, but yes, there's been the Declaration, and there's many different versions of the Declaration of Independence. So people looked at which version would have been in Virginia that time in the 1800s, which books would have been in libraries around that time. But also, again, the sniff test, you can see hiding what was hidden. You can see hiding where it was hidden. Why would you want to encrypt the names of who the treasure belonged to? Why would it be necessary to encrypt that? An abundance of caution, perhaps, or it was just something, another way to keep the mystery going. So there will be a documentary on the Beale ciphers coming up. There's 2 shows called Myth Hunters, one in the United States, one in England. The British one is doing a special on the Beale ciphers that's going to be showing within the next couple months. I know about this because I'm going to be the narrator. This was me in Colorado.
Hey, wait, that's you.
That's me. That's me. One of all, lots of work then. Yeah. That was in a hotel room in Colorado. The film crew came out and brought in a few people to be the talking heads. And so I'm actually in a hotel room, so the camera guy is perched next to the bathroom, and you can just barely see the edge of the bed there. I probably could have put my elbow on the bed, but it looks really nice there. And see, there's the door to the next hotel room. So, but I think they'll do a nice job of it. Okay, next, Kryptos. I talked a long time about Kryptos. How am I doing on time here? Okay, sculpture at the center of CIA headquarters, about 12 feet tall, 20 feet long, thousands of characters carved through it. It's a challenge to the employees of the CIA. It was created by a Washington, D.C. artist named Jim Sanborn in 1989, 1990, and it's been over 20 years. Hasn't been cracked yet. So, it was commissioned when the CIA was out. Wait, question?
For those of us who haven't heard this talk before,
Yes.
could you explain that how hard it is to get to see Kryptos?
Okay. So,
Statue.
yeah, Kryptos is a sculpture at the center of CIA headquarters, Central Intelligence Agency, Washington, D.C. I tried to get in to see it once. This was shortly after September 11th. A friend of mine, my cousin in Washington, D.C., had a very close call at the Pentagon that morning. And I went out there and to hug him. I was glad he was okay. It was Thanksgiving. And then he said, okay, well, as long as you're here in D.C., is there anything else you'd like to see? And we went to the Pentagon. We put an American flag at the memorial there. And he said, well, are there any other tourist attractions you'd like to see in D.C.? And I said, no, really just you. And he said, that's nice, I like seeing you too, but this is like Washington, D.C. And I said, well, I've heard about this sculpture called Kryptos. And the reason I heard about it was because of PhreakNIC. At PhreakNIC 3, a code had been created, the PhreakNIC 3 code by Johnny X, as a challenge to the attendees here at the conference. And no one cracked it. So several months later, fast forward, I'm at DragonCon in Atlanta, and I'm speaking on computer games at the electronics track, and many of the folks from SE 2600, PhreakNIC, are down there as well, and so we get to know them, and we have a beer at the end of the day. And they tell me about the PhreakNIC 3 code. They give me a flyer, say there's a prize for the first person to crack it. And so I was okay, and I pick it up, all the other stuff, take it home to St. Louis, and taking a very long story and shortening it, I cracked it. And I won a free trip to the next PhreakNIC, and free drinks, and free t-shirts, and free hotel. And there were dead ends in the code. And one of the dead ends was a link to the CIA website, like, okay, go solve this now. It was a link to Kryptos. That was where I first heard about Kryptos. And so when I was in DC, and I'm with my cousin, and I said, yeah, I'd like to go see Kryptos. He said, okay, where is it? I said, well, it's at the center of CIA headquarters. He said, okay, well, that's in Langley, Virginia. Let's figure it out. So this is pre-Google Earth. And you couldn't just go and get the street address for CIA. There's no street address. But I figured out where it was for various reasons. I did get some satellite pictures of the Langley, Virginia area, and I sort of knew what the CIA looked like because I'd seen Tom Clancy movies that go like overhead view, CIA headquarters. And so I looked around until I found that building in Langley, Virginia, and then my cousin and I go drive by. And we figured that we're just going to go and drive by the outer perimeter, and we're going to like peek over the wall at CIA and see if we see Kryptos. But we take the exit, and there's no perimeter road or wall. The exit takes you right in this big gate with barbed wire and a guard shack and a lot of big guys with guns that are coming pouring out of the guard shack, asking very reasonable questions right after September 11th. Who are you and why are you here? So my cousin and I are sitting there in our car, and the engine's kind of running, and we're thinking, like, can we talk our way into CIA? And so we're asking, like, we're just here to see Kryptos. And the guards say, sorry, no, official business only. It's, okay, well, is there like a public tour day? The guard said, no, official business only. I said, well, could we get invitations from our congressman? Sorry, no, official business only. And like I said, big guys with guns. And so finally my cousin and I drove away. But I kept thinking about that, official business. And a parallel part of my life at the time was right after September 11th. I was wondering if I could use my experience with cryptography to help out with the war on terrorism, sort of like people did during World War II at Bletchley Park, helping out with the Enigma system. So I had called up the local FBI in St. Louis and I said, "Hi, can I help?" And they said no. So then I called back like a week later and, "Can I help?" They said no. And I had very infrequent contact with the FBI because of my games. We had multiplayer games, so people needed to pay subscriptions, so they would give us credit card numbers, and any place the credit card numbers were coming in, there were false credit card numbers coming in, and so there was a lot of fraud going on. So periodically I would work with law enforcement. And every time I would talk to FBI, I'd say, "By the way, I'd really love to help out. Is there anything I can do with my cryptography experience?" And finally one of the agents said, "Well, what is it you know about?" And I said, "Well, I've messed with PGP and UU encoding and ROT13 and binary and ASCII and steganography." And he said, "Steganography?" And steganography is a way of hiding messages inside of pictures. Like you can look at a picture of a flower and there's actually a message hidden inside the picture. And the agent said, "We've been hearing rumors that Al-Qaeda was using steganography as a way of planning the September 11th attacks. And there's probably big brains in Washington, D.C. that know all about this stuff, but we're here in St. Louis. Cryptography is not our mission at our office. Maybe you could put together a talk about steganography." So I was thinking, official business. Maybe I can use this talk about steganography as the official business that's going to get me into CIA. So in my talk, which I gave it at several locations, because I gave it to the FBI, it was a big hit. I started getting invited to universities and different conventions, and I've given the talk here at PhreakNIC, and I gave the talk at DEF CON, the big HackerCon in Las Vegas. And in my talk, I had a slide. And what I did is I had a picture of the same thing. So on the left was this picture that didn't have anything hidden inside of it, and then a picture that did have something hidden inside of it, and you couldn't see the difference. And the picture I chose was a picture of Kryptos. So I downloaded the Kryptos image from the CI website, hid something inside of it on my side, and then showed, here's the picture without anything, here's the picture with something hidden, you can't see anything. And then every time I showed that slide, I'd say, "By the way, I'd really love to give this talk at CIA someday." And then I'd give the talk somewhere else and get to that slide, and I'd say, "By the way, I'd love to give this talk at CIA someday." So I'm at DEF CON. Big roof tent. This is when it's at the Alexis Park. And I was an alternate speaker, and they put up like these handwritten signs. Elonka speaks on steganography. And I showed myself, "By the way, I'd love to give this talk at CIA someday." At the end of the talk, people come up to the podium, they give you business cards and things, and one person comes up and they lean across the podium and they look me in the eye and they said, "I work at Langley. I think I can get you in." So here's somebody who just blew their cover at the HackerCon to tell me that they're a CIA agent. And they gave me a first name and a phone number. And I said, we want you to come speak, and we should be able to get you in so you can see Kryptos. And it was a really good talk on steganography. I said, "Great, thanks." And then I took it, and then I'm thinking, okay, was that really somebody from CIA, or was it a hacker pulling my chain, pretending to be from the CIA? So I called the number, and I talked to the person, and they said, "Yeah, we really love for you to come speak." And I said, "Okay, but you have to prove to me you work at CIA." And they said, "Well, how do we prove that?" And I said, "Well, send me an email from an official CIA email address." And they said, "Well, I don't have an email from an official CIA address." And I said, "Well, get an email from an official CIA address." About a week goes by, and I get an email from at ucia.gov, unclassified CIA.gov. So I write back to the email, get two-way communication, so I know it's not just a spoofed email address. And again, taking a long story and making it much, much shorter, I got an invitation to come in and speak at CIA. And I gave my talk, and I was able to see Kryptos and get some rubbings of the sculpture. And these are rubbings that I did. So each one of these is on an 8.5 by 11 standard piece of paper. So it gives you an idea of the size of the letters that are on the Kryptos sculpture. And it was like, cool, I did it. That was my goal. Get into CIA to see Kryptos. And then I came home, and these things made a mess in my suitcase because of all the charcoal. And I said, well, somebody else might want to see these. And so I scanned them, made a mess of my scanner, and put them on a website. Elonka.com. Your Elonka's visit to CIA, like a blog. And all of a sudden, I started getting messages from all over the world. That page changed my life. Because suddenly people who were really interested in Kryptos had someone they could write to ask questions about Kryptos. And I was the person they were writing to. So they'd write to me and say, well, who made Kryptos? And I'd say Joe Sanborn. I'd say, has he made anything else with codes? I'm like, I don't know, ask his agent. And so what else has he done? I don't know, ask his agent. And I was making an FAQ about this, so I decided to call up Sanborn's agent. I said, can you please send me a list of everything Sanborn's ever done? And they said, it's impossible. No one could ever make a list of everything Sanborn's ever done. He's done too much. I'm like, okay, I'll make a list of everything Sanborn's ever done. So I started writing to art galleries all over the country and having them send me any program. Had you ever done a show there? And if they said yeah, then I'd say, can you send me one of the programs from the show? And I'd get that, and then I'd look in the back of the program, and Sanborn is also shown at the following 5 places, and I'd write to those places. And I was hiring researchers in DC to go copy files in the Smithsonian, and I was really kind of obsessed with the whole thing. My apartment was going crazy because I was just getting copies and copies and copies of things. I call my apartment Smithsonian West because of all the documents that were coming in. And it was just a fun hobby. So, but anyway, long story, and I'm probably going to be eating up a bunch of my time here. So that's how I got into CIA.
Get it? Catch it all? Write it down?
Thank you. So, so Kryptos, the 4 parts, 3 of the 4 parts have been solved. They were solved by Jim Globally in 1999. And then after he announced his solution, which made international news, then the CIA came and said, oh, well, we have somebody who solved those 3 parts too in 1998. But he just wrote a report that was internal to the CIA, and we didn't think it was a big deal. And then, so that made news. And then the NSA came forward and said, well, we have people that have solved it too, but we're not going to tell you who, we're not going to tell you when, which is very NSA, no such agency. And my own feeling is I was gathering all these other documents from different museums and copies, and I was asking the NSA, can you please send me your documents about working on Kryptos? And they said, no, it's classified. And I said, hang on. This is a recreational cipher. It's not a matter of national security. Why should this be classified? Oh, because we use secret techniques. I'm like, well, send me, redact whatever you want and send me the other stuff. And they said, well, no, it's classified. I'm like, okay, so I filed a Freedom of Information Act request on the NSA. And I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but I did get the information here. And I found out that in 1992, the CIA's deputy director, this is Admiral William Studman, and he had previously been at the NSA, but now he was at the CIA. And he went back to the NSA and he threw down the gauntlet. And he said, okay, you guys are so hot, let's see how hot you are. And so the NSA's director, that was Vice Admiral Mike McConnell, he took up the challenge, and they put together a 4-person team at the NSA to put the NSA's computers onto Kryptos, onto part 4. They solved the first 3 parts, but couldn't solve the 4th part. And then in early 1993, they sent a memo to the CIA that kind of documented what the results of their progress were. So I put a FOIA request, Freedom of Information Act request, on the whole shebang here. So this is a lot of fine print here, but in March 2010, I filed my request. And they came right back and they said, oh yeah, are you willing to pay the search fees? And I said, okay, yeah, sure. June, I got a message from them saying, okay, we've searched for the documents. You have been placed in the first in, first out processing queue for non-personal, easy cases. But since there were several cases ahead of mine, it might take more than 20 days for them to get back to me. I'm like, okay, this is in June. December, I write back to them, hey, how's it going? And I get told the reference case is actively being worked and in fact has already made it through the first level of review. There are additional review and approval stages, and there are other cases ahead of yours, so it may be some time before you receive the response. 5 months later, I write back, hey, how's it going? Oh, they say, oh, your case is in the final approval stages. A few months later, I write back, how you doing? Hey, your FOIA case is in the final approval stages. there are a number of cases ahead of yours in that queue. So at this point, I'm like reaching out to friends. I'm like, yo, what's up? Is this going to go on for the rest of my life? And they said, probably. But apparently, whether or not it went through the system or whether somebody helped, it did finally come through. And I got a big fat envelope last year, 2013, that was, and at the top it says, encircled, please forward to Admiral Studman for review. And it was all the notes that the NSA had about Kryptos. And I wanted to say that down here at the bottom, approved for release by NSA on May 21st, 2013, FOIA case 61191. That's me. So it is possible to get documents out of the NSA and then not have to go hide in Moscow. Just saying. Just saying. Okay. So this went on my website as well. Got a lot of attention. So coming back to Kryptos. Am I doing on time? Okay, yeah. All right. I may go a little late, but we'll go on with the story here. So as I'm gathering all this information about Kryptos and the artist, Jim Sanborn, who at one point called me, there was a message on my voicemail from the artist saying, who are you and why do you have a webpage about me? So I said, oh, you're Sanborn. Oh, I'm such a big fan. I love your work. And now we're friends, and I've been to his house, and I've taken him out to sushi and bought him drinks and done what I could to pump him for information. And I found out that after he created Kryptos, he made another piece, which he called the Untitled Kryptos piece. And he sold this to a private collector. And I tracked down the location of the private collector. This is a .com millionaire in California, David Bonnet. And he likes collecting things that are to do with cryptography, like he has an Enigma machine in his living room. And he bought this sculpture and it was in his backyard. And I called him up when I was like, hi, I'm Elonka. I'm a researcher. Can I come and take pictures of your backyard? And he said, sure. And so I got to go in there and take pictures. And the text of Kryptos is all down one side of it. And this, the top left one is the one that's in the guy's backyard. The bottom right one, this one is the exact same, but 20% larger. And this one, anyone can see because it's in Washington, D.C. at the Hirshhorn Museum, that big oval-shaped museum that's on the big mall. It's called Antipodes. So all of these letters, on one side, it's all the text of Kryptos, but in a different order. And on the other side, it's all Russian text, Cyrillic text. And Sanborn liked that juxtaposition of a code that was related to the CIA being next to a code that was related to the KGB. So the Russian code was repeated on another of Sanborn's sculptures, and this one's in North Carolina, in Charlotte. It's called the Cyrillic Projector. This is at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, between the Friday and the Fretwell buildings. And Sanborn had originally used this for gallery shows when he was on the road, and then he sold it. And so it's installed there, and there's a light on in the inside that beams encrypted text all around the courtyard. And those of you anybody here know Russian or know the Cyrillic alphabet at all? Okay. So you may notice looking at this that you got Russian text, but then there's a few letters here that are not, those are not Cyrillic. Now it says USA. It's actually the last part of a longer word, which is Medusa. Ben, I'm going to need help because this is kind of, wait, no, it's good. All right. And Medusa is one of the keys that's needed to crack that part. And I will come into Kryptos and say what Kryptos says. I'm getting it. Another thing I noticed is that on the Russian side of the sculpture that was in the garden, that there was a difference that on Kryptos, you've got the parts numbered 1, 2, 3, 4. On the untitled piece, it starts at 3. 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, and then it like chops off halfway through 3. Why? I don't know. There's also a difference. There's 2 dots, S dot, F dot. The letters are the same as what's on Kryptos, but the dots do not appear on Kryptos. So why are the dots on this piece and not on the other? If they were on Kryptos, they'd be about there. So what does Kryptos say? Well, 4 plates. The codes are on 2 of the plates. The other 2 plates are what's called a visionary tableau. It's called polyalphabetic substitution system. right? And this is the Visioneer side. And it makes a cipher alphabet. So if you take the 26 letters of the alphabet, and then you take a keyword, and you take the letters for that word out, and you put them on the left, and then you scrunch up all the rest of the letters on the right, you still end up with 26 letters, but it's slightly scrambled through a technique with a key on it there. And that's exactly what's used on Kryptos for that Visioneer tableau, is this cipher alphabetic system, where Kryptos is one of the keys. And then, so you can see at the top you got Kryptos, and then if you take that same line but you shift it by one, and put it, and then shift it again, so you get these nice diagonals. You can see with the Q's and the L's and the I's. Another artifact of this is that you can read the word Kryptos across the top line, and also down this left-hand column, you can read the word Kryptos there too. Now imagine if we're using a different word. Instead of Kryptos down the side, we're going to spell a different word. We're going to have the word palimpsest. So we still have that cipher alphabet. We're just, again, we're scrambling those lines a bit. Palimpsest is a word for a scroll that has had one message written on it, and then that message was scraped off so the scroll could be reused, and another message was written on it, but you can still see bits of the old message showing through. That's a palimpsest. So, part one of Kryptos is these top two lines on that plate. And we have our tableau with Kryptos here and palimpsest down the left-hand column. And the letters E, M, U, F, P, H, D from the sculpture. We take each letter and put it on a different line. E, M, U, F, P. E goes up and becomes a B. M becomes an E. U becomes a T. F becomes a W, and so forth. So E, M, U, F, P, H, C becomes B, E, T, W, E, E, N between. We keep doing that. We can go from these two lines of the cipher text using the keys of Kryptos and palimpsest. Plain text is, between subtle shading and the absence of light lies the nuance of illusion. That says inclusion on the slide. It's not a typo on the slide. It's carved that way in the sculpture. And I asked Jim Sanborn, I said, was that a mistake? And he said, no, it was deliberate. But it's not what it is that's so important, it's where it is. It's the orientation or the position. Whatever that means. Part two starts line 3, comes down to the end of this plate, uses the same system. Here's the cipher text. Sanborn did admit there was a mistake on this one, that he forgot a letter down there. Plain text, this time instead of Kryptos and palimpsest, we have Kryptos and abscissa. Abscissa is the term for an x-coordinate on a graph. Plain text comes out, it was totally invisible. How's that possible? They used the Earth's magnetic field, X. The information was gathered and transmitted underground to an unknown location, X. Does Langley know about this? They should. It's buried out there somewhere, X. Who knows the exact location? Only WW. This was his last message, X. 38 degrees, 57 minutes, 6.5 seconds north. 77 degrees, 8 minutes, 44 seconds west. ID by Rose. Or we thought it said ID by Rose, but once we put in that missing S, it came out to say X layer 2. Part 3 starts at the top of this plate, goes down to about the fourth line there. Different distribution, lots of vowels here, lots of E's and T's. This is not a substitution system, this is a transposition system. Question?
Just curious how you get the two meanings with
Where it went from ID by Rose to X by layer 2? I can go into that, ask me again after the talk. I'll go into as much detail as you want. So this is, all the messages in the plain text are here. They're just scrambled. And if you unscramble them, this is a way that I came up with of counting down by rows. You can start here, S, L, O, W, L, Y, slowly, slowly, desperately, slowly. Plain text, slowly, desperately, slowly. The remains of passage debris that encumbered the lower part of the doorway was removed. With trembling hands, I made a tiny breach in the upper left-hand corner, and then, widening the hole a little, I inserted the candle and peered in. The hot air escaping from the chamber caused the flame to flicker, but presently details of the room within emerged from the mist. X. Did you see anything? Q. Sorry.
Egypt?
From Egypt. This is from November 26, 1922. Paraphrased extract from the diary of Howard Carter on the day he was discovering King Tut's tomb. And there's part 4. Can't tell you what it says. We don't know. This is me smiling at Kryptos. Part 4 is most of these bottom 4 rows there. So where do the coordinates point to? So this is CIA. This is the original headquarters building on the right, the new headquarters building on the left. This white building with the UFO-shaped roof is the cafeteria. And so Kryptos is here. So there's a big line of windows here in the cafeteria, so as the CIA employees are eating lunch, they can look out the window and they can see this nice courtyard with the duck pond and this mysterious sculpture. Sanborn designed this courtyard. He also designed some things out here outside the entrance to the new headquarters building. Close up, yeah. Cafeteria, courtyard, duck pond, Kryptos. Entrance, nice glass domed atrium here. Sanborn designed some pieces out here. Another view. Lots of satellite views of the CIA. That's a lot of fun. So, courtyard, duck pond, Kryptos, Sanborn sculptures here. Coordinates point not to Kryptos, but to a point about here, about 150 feet southeast of the sculpture. There's some speculation, is it just off? And now, you got to think the latitude 6.5 seconds north, not 6 seconds, not 7 seconds, 6.5 seconds. Anybody in here a geocacher? Yeah? Okay. Geocachers know, if you've worked on the right geocaches, that a tenth of a second of latitude is a very specific location, about 10 feet across. So that at 6.5 seconds, it's way outside of that 10 feet range there. These gray things are lunch tables. They can be dragged around so that they're not stationary. We don't think those are related at all. Other view. So these are these stones that Sanborn created. They're large slabs of granite that are tilted up out of the ground to look sort of like a geologic scene. And in between, there's sheets of copper. Sheets of copper have Morse code messages on them. Say things like SOS, T is your position. There's also a compass rose and a lodestone, magnetic lodestone. So if we put it all in context here, we put some of the slabs here by the duck pond, which are in a line pointing towards Kryptos, and then over here, a roughly parallel line with other slabs. And the coordinates, like to about there. Possibly related, we don't know. Yeah.
In your personal time with the artist, was he forthcoming with any information?
In my time with the artist, was he forthcoming with any information? Possibly, it's hard to tell. Yeah, you can watch videos of him and he loves being really vague. He loves saying things like, it's possible, anything's possible. I've met both him and I've met Ed Scheidt, who was the chairman of the CIA Cryptographic Center that taught Sanborn about codes. And between the two of them, I believe that it is solvable. It's not intended to be a never solved code. It was intended to be solved with pencil and paper. It's solvable by someone who's not a cryptographer. Scheidt once told me that his son could solve it, and his son's not a cryptographer. It's going to be in English. They discussed the possibility of making an answer in Phoenician or Sanskrit or something, but they said, no, the answer's in English. All the letters are used. That's just another one of the stones. We did find that on the tableau side, there's an extra L on one line. This should be EFGHIJLMN, that uses L on 2 lines. Might be a hint, might not. That line with the L is also where there's some letters out of alignment. On Cyrillic projector, he did put a hint. The word, this is also a polyalphabetic system. The keys are the word tien for darkness and Medusa. And Medusa is a word you can see that is a not Cyrillic that is beamed from the sculpture. And where does the word Medusa come from? It comes from the 3rd line on the sculpture. And there's an actual extra bolt there. It doesn't show up well here, but if you look from the other side, it's really obvious that there's an extra bolt, and it was the only such bolt on the sculpture. So it's possible that it was there as a way of drawing the eye to that line. This is Ed Scheidt, chairman of CI Graphic Center. He said that he did things to mask the English in part 4, that he used a little bit of steganography, that we solved the first 3 parts without recovering the keys first, that we had the benefit of the patterns of the English language. But he did say that it isn't English and uses all the letters. Sanborn gave a hint in 2010, made international news. He called up the New York Times to announce this. He said, here are 6 letters of the answer. That starting at the 64th character, where the cipher text is NYPVTP, the English plain text is BERLIN, Berlin. And we did a lot of research trying to figure out, did that help us? We found that if we use Visioneer, same method, but instead of Kryptos abscissa, use keys like shifted and binary, we can get the word Berlin to show up right there, but nothing intelligible before it and nothing intelligible after it. There's also lots of other key pairs that will also generate the word Berlin at exactly that spot, like drifts mobilize and Bushler incessant. We asked Sanborn if Berlin is the city, or maybe it's a combination of other words like amber line or number of links. But he said it's Berlin, it's the city. And so we've tried looking, what are words that would come after Berlin in a sentence? Berlin Wall, Berlin Tunnel. What are words that would come before Berlin? West Berlin, East Berlin. Hasn't helped us yet. There's also 3 letters here that are out of alignment, and I've shown this slide to Sanborn, and he said those are important. Those are deliberate. Don't know what that means either. Another thing, possible clue, is this was really the picture of Kryptos. This was on Wikipedia, it was on the CI website, and Sanborn said, I hate that picture. It's the wrong side. And I said, what do you mean? He says, it's Kryptos from the side, it's not from the front. I said, what do you mean, what's the front? He said, this is the correct orientation of Kryptos, this is the front.
So which part is the front?
He says, that's the front, on the bottom right.
Curve.
You're referencing this 1, 2, 3, 4 front, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? The parts you were talking about?
Well, there's 4 tableaus, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, four metallic plates. And I know we're running a little late, and I know the PhreakNIC officers are probably eager to
Keep going.
They're not.
Johnny X says take as long as you like.
He said just that.
And I have to give props to Johnny X, who wrote the PhreakNIC 3 code that had the dead end in it, which is where I first learned about Kryptos, so thank you, Johnny X. All right. Okay, question here.
I think I might have figured out a way to translate this.
Okay, the Voynich Manuscript? Or Kryptos?
Voynich Manuscript.
Okay, I would love to hear that. Can we talk about it after, when I'm done with the talk? Okay,
Is Sanborn
good.
alive?
What?
Is Sanborn alive?
Sanborn is alive. He was born in 1945 in Washington, D.C. He currently maintains 2 homes, one in Georgetown and one on an island which is coincidentally called Jimmy Island, which is about 2 hours southeast of Washington, D.C.
Do you have any torture devices?
Do I have any torture devices? There is a term for this which is called rubber hose cryptography. Can the spies steal an answer before the folks can beat the answer out of someone?
Does Sanborn know Russian?
Does Sanborn know? He does not know Russian. And he's done several sculptures that had different languages in them. He usually reaches out to friends of his. Like he has a favorite coffee house where all the waitresses were Ethiopian, so he has a sculpture which is in the Ethiopian language, and he got the help of those waitresses from the coffee house.
You may have said this, but when he dies, has he made arrangements to make sure that it's ever solved?
Yeah, according to Sanborn, he has put the answer into 2 different safe deposit boxes, one on western side of the United States. Yeah, one on the eastern side. And members of his extended family have the mechanism to look into these safe deposit boxes. And it's an interesting question now. How can he communicate to these relatives how to tell if someone is right without telling them what the answer is? So what he's done is he's come up with something called the K4 test. So we have 4 parts of Kryptos, 1, 2, 3, 4. So the unsolved part we call K4. And if someone were to go to his girlfriend, Jay, and ask her, say, I've solved Kryptos part 4, can you go into the safe deposit and verify that it's the correct answer? She is then to ask them something like, what is the 72nd letter? What is the 20th letter? What is the 35th letter? I'm making up these numbers, but the kind of 3 random spots. And if someone answers those questions correctly, then she can make the assumption that, okay, they must really know the answer, and then go into the safe deposit box to verify. Though those of us that are working on it know that if someone's got the answer and they've got a method, it's going to be pretty easy to duplicate. We won't need to go into the safe deposit box to check. This is what he said instead. I had dinner with him once, and I was saying, Jay, so what is the first question? For 5th, and she was like, question? What? So I'm not even sure she will remember it, but this is what Sanborn says. That is what the answer. When he commissioned, when the sculpture was dedicated, there was a ceremony there. The director of the CIA at the time was there, William Webster. And Sanborn had been debating how to provide the answer. So what he did is he wrote the answer, and then he cut it up into lots of little pieces, and he put those pieces into an envelope, and he gave that envelope to Webster at the dedication ceremony. Webster handed it off to his media relations guy, who's currently in charge of the International Spy Museum in DC. I've been trying to track him down for a conversation and haven't had any luck. Yeah.
So was the sculpture part of the expansion or new headquarters for the CIA?
Yes.
And what year?
Okay. The original headquarters building, the CIA was outgrowing it in the mid-1980s. So then they commissioned a new headquarters building. And along with the new building, they were also going to commission art to go around the building. All through DC, you can find this, and often for many buildings, they get a tax break if they have art on their grounds. It is what it is. So the CIA had, basically they created a committee that created a committee that created a committee through the General Services Administration, the Art and Architecture Program. And they requested, they sent out invitations to artists to create art to go around CIA. So Sanborn didn't approach them. He was contacted by the Art and Architecture Program. When he was invited, he had never made a sculpture with codes. He'd never even made a sculpture with text on it before. But he liked working with things. He had a theme of invisible forces. He liked, with his art, making things that were invisible, visible. Like you would walk into an art gallery where there was a Sanborn show, and there would be hundreds of needles hanging from the ceiling, each by a different thread, not connected in any way. But as you walk in, all these needles are all lined up and are all pointing in the same direction because there's a lodestone at the far end of the room. So it was Sanborn's way of trying to show the invisible lines of magnetic force that were in the room. And he's done things like that with magnetism and Coriolis force and geologic forces. And the Art and Architecture Program Committee liked the idea of the invisible forces. They felt that it tied in well with the mission of the CIA, things that were trying to take things that were invisible and make them visible. And so that's why they invited him. And then once he got the gig, he did research on the CIA and decided he wanted to do a sculpture with the theme of intelligence gathering, information gathering. And he named it Kryptos, which is Greek for the word hidden. He didn't know anything about codes at the time, but William Webster, who was the director of the CIA, was a very staunch supporter of the idea of getting art around CIA. He kind of wanted to soften the image of the CIA at the time. And he teamed Sanborn with Ed Scheidt, who's shown in the CIA Cryptographic Center. Ed did know about codes and spent a couple months tutoring Sanborn about codes. And then Sanborn came up with the messages to carve onto the sculpture and carved them by hand. It took him like 2 years to carve all the letters. Yeah, I've actually been, I was on my Kryptos tour. I was tracking down, I wanted to see all of the documents that had been generated while Sanborn was being chosen. So I went into the belly of the beast. I went to the General Services Administration, and I wanted to see, so I saw the correspondence where the committee was formed, and the correspondence where that committee was forming another committee, and then the correspondence as they were inviting, all of this is stored. Because I wanted to see if Sanborn said, oh, this is what it's going to say when I'm done. And originally he wanted it to be where as you walked into the CIA, you ran into simple codes, and then the codes became progressively more complex as you got in. That's where those Morse code messages running outside. He'd also originally said that he wanted to work with a famous fiction writer. He scrapped that idea, just like anyone who's worked on a movie or anything knows. You start off with one thing and then things kind of morph as you go. There is a misconception that that fiction writer was Dan Brown, but that is not possible because at the time Kryptos was installed, Brown had not even written his first novel. So anybody that tries to tell you it was Dan Brown as a famous fiction writer is just completely off base. Also at the GSA, I tracked down the pamphlet that Sanborn wrote as instructions to the groundskeepers of how to maintain the Kryptos sculpture, like how to wash it, how to if something went wrong, how to repair it. Because I was hoping that I might find something like make sure to mow around the secret panel or something. But no, there was nothing like that in there. Okay, almost done. So Berlin, could part 4 have something to do with Berlin? Well, the time that Kryptos was being created was around the same time that the Berlin Wall was coming down. So there was probably in the works for there to be a Berlin Wall piece of artwork on site at CIA. It's possible, it's entirely speculation on my part, that the coordinates were pointing to the original intended location of this section of the Berlin Wall that was donated to the CIA. However, at CIA, so again, we have Kryptos here, coordinates are here. The actual Berlin Wall monument sculpture at CIA is actually down around here. So also, just something I wanted to point out, before anybody gets teary-eyed about this being a bit of the Berlin Wall, when the CIA received these pieces, they were blank. It was a blank part of the wall. They hired an artist to paint fake graffiti on it for the installation of the CIA. Just saying. Okay. So part 4, again, can't tell you what it says, we don't know. Very briefly, a little bit about Kryptos and pop culture. Anybody read Da Vinci Code?
Yeah.
Okay. Hidden in the artwork of this edition, there are puzzles hidden in the artwork. There are 5 puzzles. 2 of these puzzles refer to Kryptos. This is something that Dan Brown does with some of his books, is he gives clues to the next novel by hiding it in the artwork of the previous one. The sequel to Da Vinci Code was The Lost Symbol, which also has puzzles hidden in the artwork. I helped Dan Brown with this novel because Kryptos is a theme for this novel. So there's a character in this book, Nola K, which is named after me. It's an anagram for Elon. Okay. On Da Vinci Code, in the back artwork, this is a fake tear, very faint. I don't know if you can see it in this light. That are the words "only WW knows," which is a reference to part 2 of Kryptos, when there's the exact location. And also on the back, very faintly light red on dark red here, are numbers: 37 degrees, 57 minutes, 6.5 seconds north, 77 degrees, 8 minutes, 44 seconds west. And I told you about a symbol. So, summary, why hasn't K4 been solved yet? Well, one, it's short. It's only 97 characters. If we would have had thousands of characters with this method, you probably would have cracked it by now. But when you have something really short, it's really difficult to find the patterns. It's also possible there's something on CIA grounds we need. Kryptos was not intended as a public challenge. It was intended as a challenge to employees of the CIA. And it's very difficult to get in there, so there may be something there that we just can't find or we can't see, and that's why we can't solve it. We might have been misdirected. We might have missed something. It might have a mistake, but we've really hammered on Sanborn pretty hard. We think we know all the mistakes on the sculpture at this point. So Kryptos has 4 sections, 3 of the 4 have been solved. Both Sanborn and Scheid have said that it's solvable. People ask me if I want to be the one to solve it. I'm like, I just want to see it solved. I want it off my plate so I can go on and do other things. So as a project manager, I'm kind of like gather information and I want to share it as much as possible. See if someone else can maybe take this and solve it from there. If you'd like more information about it, there's a lot on the internet. I have a book that has a section on Kryptos. I wrote 2 articles about Kryptos in this book, which is about the Dan Brown novel. It's a lost symbol. If you want to learn more about codes, there's 2 books I recommend. One is by Simon Sting. It's called The Code Book. Excellent book. Good overview of cryptography. And then if you want to dig deeper into it, you want to get a book by David Kahn called The Code Breakers. Big, thick book. And then if you really want to get into hardcore modern cryptographic techniques, you want to look up a guy named Bruce Schneier, who does a regular newsletter called Cryptogram. And if I had to point anyone, any reporter for information about modern codes, I'd say Schneier should be your first stop.
Hey, didn't you write a book too?
Yeah, he wrote some books too.
No, you.
Oh, yeah?
Show the book.
Promote.
I wrote a book. It's out of print now, but I wrote it. It was in like 8 printings, but it's finally come to the end. I may do a second edition.
Second edition.
So, okay, any other questions on Kryptos or any of these codes that I've gone over? I know that you want to talk about Voynich more later. Anything else? So if there's a takeaway for anybody here, it's not so much about cryptography, but if you get stuck somewhere, like when I was talking to the FBI or something, when someone tells me you can't do it, that's what really makes me kind of dig my heels in and go and do it. Persistence has really brought me to some interesting places. And Will Wright, who's a game developer, actually, wait, question, go ahead.
Well, where do you start if you're gonna, if you see a code that you want to crack?
Where do I start? I look for patterns. I look at it, am I seeing lots of vowels? There's 3 types of codes. Broad brush, substitution, transposition, and concealment. Substitution, letters have been swapped for another. Transposition, they've been scrambled. And concealment, something's been hidden, so you're not even clear that there is a message there, like steganography. So take a look at the code and first get a sense of which of those 3 it is, and then go from there and do a lot of counting, look for patterns. What is the plain text going to be? What was the sophistication of the person who wrote it? What was their state? I've cracked many codes in the hacker scene, PhreakNIC, Elonka, and often I've cracked, like when the Elonka code came out, at the bottom of the sheet of paper, there's the code at the bottom that said, "Note, past puzzle solvers are ineligible for prizes associated with solving the Elonka code. Give someone else a chance, Elonka." So I cracked that one too. And some of them I've solved when there's all these other people that are at the convention didn't crack them, is because I think, okay, what was the state of mind of the person who wrote it? Especially if it's a convention code, it's probably being finished the night before the con. The guy who's writing it, Johnny X, is probably drunk. He's probably sleep deprived. He probably made mistakes. So if he's in that state, what kind of mistakes might he have made? So if it's a Quaker cipher where you're supposed to go left to right and he's inebriated, he might have gone right to left. And so trying to understand who wrote it and what their own knowledge base is. Social engineering is often the way I work on this. Yeah.
Do you have any interest in number stations at all?
Do I have any interest in number stations? Like the ones where the shortwave radio's going around and there's a voice just calling off numbers?
Yeah.
I've looked into it a little bit, but I probably couldn't tell you anything more than a good Wikipedia article could probably tell you about them. Yeah. Is there a question in the back? Any questions? So as I was saying about Will Wright, famous game developer, wrote The Sims and SimCity. He was once asked, what is the secret of success? And his answer was pathological persistence. And with that, thank you very much for coming.